everybody. So today I'm going to be cooking a chuck roast, a bottom blade chuck roast on the barbecue. And the way I'm going to be cooking it today is I'm going to be smoking it first, and then I'm going to be wrapping it in tin foil and then letting it cook wrapped up for a few hours until it's tender. So this is traditionally the way brisket is cooked, but couldn't find brisket at any butcher shop here where I live. So the chuck roast is the closest thing that I could get. I still don't have a real smoker, so I'm going to be smoking it on a gas grill. I've done a couple of other recipes that I've smoked on the gas grill, and they came out really nice. Obviously, you're never going to get the same taste on a gas grill as you're going to do on a real smoker, but I guess you do with what you have. I have a smoke box that one of my friends got me that I'm going to be using this time. I've used it a few times already, as you can see, and the smoke box works a lot better than the aluminum packets that I was using before. The reason is that it's a lot easier to control the amount of smoke that's coming out, and they have less of a tendency of catching fire and burning in the smoke box than they do in an aluminum packet. So the first thing I'm going to need for this recipe is a spice rub to put on the meat. You can use any type of spice rub that you like, that you would put on beef. In grocery stores, you often have brisket rubs, spice rubs, or even Montreal steak spice could be a good choice for this recipe. I'm going to be making my own rub. I like to make those when I can. So what I'm going to be putting in this spice rub is, the first thing is going to be dried paprika chilies. These are can be bought at any, you can find these at any Mexican grocery stores. Even certain specialty grocery stores will have these. So they're dried paprika chilies. So normally you would buy paprika already in a powder form. I like to make my own because the longer, after you grind this, the longer it stays, it touches the air, the more it loses its taste. So by doing it just before you put on the meat, you're going to have better flavor. The other thing I'm going to be putting in this spice rub is peppercorns. I have 3 color peppercorns here that I'm going to be grinding as well in the spice rub, in the spice grinder, sorry. So there's red, black, and white peppercorns. Also going to be putting some kosher salt and some cayenne pepper and a little bit of brown sugar. So that's going to be my spice rub I'm going to use for this recipe today. So here I have my spice rub that I put together. Again, here I have some dried paprika and 3 color peppercorns that I grinded in the coffee grinder or spice grinder. You'll notice that the texture is very coarse. The reason is that this piece of meat is going to be cooking for quite a while, so it doesn't really matter if your spices aren't in a powder form, because they're going to cook down on the meat. The other thing that I added to this spice mixture is some kosher salt, about 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. So I have about 2 tablespoons of cracked peppercorns. I have 2 tablespoons of paprika chili, and about 2 teaspoons of kosher salt, half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, and 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I actually used coconut sugar this time. Here I have my chuck roast. It's about 2 pounds of a chuck roast. It's not a very big piece of meat. So the spice blend that or the amount of spice blend that I have is really for a 2-pound piece of meat. If you're using a bigger piece of meat, you might need a little more rub. So you adjust depending on the size of your meat. So you can see that there's quite a bit of marbling, fat marbling all over the place here. But you also have these big chunks of fat that come across here. So you have a lot of connective tissue as well. So this type of meat, if you cook it like a regular steak, you just put it on the heat really high and cook it and then take it off and try to eat it, it's going to be very tough because of all that connective tissue. So that's why this is a piece of meat, just like brisket, that's ideal to cook low, what we call low and slow. So this is going to cook for a total of about 5 hours, maybe 6. It's going to depend on the tenderness. So I'm going to be smoking it for about 2 hours, and then I'm going to wrap it and I'm going to cook it until it's tender. It really, the amount of time that I use to cook it is pretty irrelevant. Really what you want is you want your meat to be tender. So once I wrap it, I'm going to let it cook for a couple of hours, and I'm going to check for tenderness. If it's not tender, I'm going to leave it until it becomes tender. It could take 3, it could take 4, it could even take 5 hours depending on the piece of meat that you have. The other way to make sure that it's tender is the temperature. So when we smoke it, we want to bring it up to about 160 Fahrenheit, and that's as much as we want to smoke it. Once it's at 160, I'm going to wrap it, and then I'm going to cook it until it's about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Usually 205 degrees is pretty much the temperature that you know your piece of meat should be pretty tender. However, I'm going to check for tenderness myself just to make sure. So I'm putting a good amount of rub on my on the meat. I want to make sure that I cover all sides of it. Before I put the rub on, I put some Worcestershire sauce on the meat as a binder. This helps the rub stick to the meat, and when you turn it around, it avoids that all the rub comes off the meat. Alright, so the meat's been resting for about 30 minutes. I have my smoke box here that's ready to go. I put some cherry wood in here, and I put 1 piece of mesquite. You can use pretty much any kind of wood you like, depending on the taste. You have to do some research on that. But mostly it's cherry wood, and I put 1 little piece of mesquite. Mesquite has a much stronger taste, so that's why I only put 1 piece, and the cherry wood is a lot lighter, so I put a lot more of that, and I let it soak in water for about half an hour, and now we're ready to go. And the next step is going to be to set up my grill. So I'm going to start my gas grill. I'm going to place the smoke box on the gas grill, and I'm going to set it up for indirect heat, indirect cooking, so that the meat can cook with the smoke. All right, so my barbecue set up. Basically have my smoke box here. As you can see, it's starting to bellow some smoke, if you can see it. And the burner on the left hand side here on this side is on. The burner on the right hand side, the middle burner and the side burners on the right side are off. So I'm going to be putting the meat on the right side of the barbecue, and so that I can reproduce an indirect smoking type of environment. Obviously I don't have a real smoker, but as I said, this has given me some pretty good results in the last few times I used it, so I'm going with this. So I'm basically going to be taking my chuck roast that I seasoned, that we seasoned together. I'm going to be putting it on this side of the barbecue, and again, it's on indirect heat. That means there's no heat underneath. The grills are a little hot, but that's just the heat that's coming from the left burner. So now I'm going to close the lid, and I'm going to let that go. So the barbecue temperature I'm shooting for is between 275 and 300 degrees. This is a gas grill, so the temperature, the barbecue temperature is going to differ, or is going to be different from a regular smoker. With the experiences I've had before with smoking, 275 to 300 is pretty much the temperature I'm looking for. After an hour, I'm going to check on the meat, and I'm going to also insert a probe thermometer to see the internal temperature. I'm going to bring the internal temperature of the meat to 160 Fahrenheit. And that's when it gets to 160, that's when I'm going to wrap it and put it back on the heat to finish cooking and tenderizing. All right, so it's been about an hour that the meat is on the barbecue, a little over an hour. As you can see, my smoke box is still going, and basically the meat, you can see that it has a nice brownish color. But the two things that we want to check when we're smoking a piece of meat like that, especially beef, first of all, is the internal temperature. So we want to bring it up to 160. So I have a probe thermometer that I'm going to be inserting into the meat in a few seconds. And the other thing that you want to check is the rub that's on top. So basically you want to have a nice bark that we call. So a bark is basically you want the rub to set. Now when I touch the rub, I can see that it's still sticking to my fingers, so it's not set yet. So we need to wait for it to set. So it probably needs another 45 minutes to an hour. I'm going to insert, the first thing I'm going to do actually before I do that is I'm going to turn the meat 180 degrees because my heat is on the left hand side here. So I want both sides of the meat to get the same amount of heat. So now I'm going to insert the probe thermometer inside the meat. We want to get to the middle as much as possible. And right now, as you can see, the thermometer is reading 63 Fahrenheit. It's going to go up because this thermometer takes a few minutes to get the actual temperature. Actually, it's 133 now, as you can see. So it needs about another maybe 100, not 100, but another 30 degrees more. So about 45 minutes to an hour. So I'm going to close the lid and let it go again for another hour. As you can see, the internal temperature of the roast is at 154 degrees. But I'm going to remove it from the grill and wrap it and put it back in a wrap because it's had enough smoke. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So if we look at it, if you look at the roast, you can see that it has a nice dark color. You can see that the fat is starting to render out. And the other thing also is if I touch it like that, I can tell that the actual rub that I put on is tight. So it's ready to be wrapped up to get tenderized. All right, so as you can see, I have the piece of meat now on some foil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting it back on the barbecue, wrapped up in foil to let it finish cook and to tenderize. Now you can see that it has a nice dark color, and the seasoning on the outside is set. So you have a nice tight bark on the outside. It's nice and dark. So what I'm going to be putting on to let it finish is basically, first of all, some just a little touch of barbecue sauce. So I'm just going to put on top. And this is just a regular sweet barbecue sauce. The reason I'm putting that is because I put a lot of pepper, some garlic, some cayenne. So I want to balance it out with some sweetness. I'm also going to put a bit of beef broth because you need some type of liquid. It's kind of like when you're braising beef in the oven. And I'm also going to put a little bit of red wine vinegar. This is going to give it a little tang and a little acidity. And that's basically it. And that's it. So now I'm going to put it back on the barbecue, same temperature between 275 and 300, and then I'm going to let it go for about 2 to 3 hours. I'm going to check for tenderness in about an hour and a half or 2 hours. So basically we want it tender, and the internal temperature, we want to bring it up to about 205 degrees. That's the target to have some tender chuck roast. All right, so the roast has been going for about 3 hours, wrapped up in foil with the sauce that I put in. So we're ready to take it out and slice it. All right, let's see what it looks like when we slice it. It's hard to slice because it's almost like pulled beef. It really tastes good.
My wife's laughing at me right there because she saw my face when I put it in my